Hello, class, and welcome to this recording of our notes on the rule of Mao Zedong in China. So, first, you're going to get started with answering a question about Stalin and Russia. What can you tell me about what happened when Stalin tried to reinvent the Russian economy into the communist system with his 5-year plans? We're going to talk about Mao in China, and Mao drew a lot of inspiration from Stalin's ideas on how to transition from a capitalist or traditional society to a communist one. Now, to get us started, China at the beginning of World War I. This is where the first problems for China began. Now, at the start of World War I, Europe controlled a large part of the Chinese coastline in what were the spheres of influence, and you should remember those from one of our previous units. The interior of China was controlled by warlords. So rather than have a governor of New York State, regions of China were controlled by various generals who then taxed the people that worked within them, thereby weakening the power structure of the country as a whole. Now, as time wore on, people grew tired of the disunity and domination by foreign powers within China. And so after World War I, we have the May 4th movement. The May 4th movement led to the creation of the Chinese Communist Party, led mostly by students who took inspiration from Mao Zedong in trying to create a communist society as the answer to the problems that China had been facing. In the 1930s, then, a war broke out between the communists under Mao Zedong and the nationalists under Chiang Kai-shek. Chiang Kai-shek was trying to lead a somewhat of a republic, but really was more in terms of what we might call a dictatorship. Chiang Kai-shek was a military leader and had support from European and American powers who gave him financial aid in order to keep communism at bay in the 30s. Mao Zedong at this time had promised land redistribution. China had a severe, what you would call, disparity, meaning there was a huge difference between the amount of land owned between the rich and the poor. Most of the valuable land in China was controlled by a select number of landlords, which meant that the rich were very wealthy and those who were poor did not really have an opportunity to help improve their situation. Kind of similar to what we saw with the estate system in France before the French Revolution. Now, the nationalists and communists had been fighting. Mao Zedong was on the run from the nationalists for a while, and Mao managed to escape via the Long March, which you should remember from your web quest. Basically, Mao Zedong managed a long, arduous escape into the center of the country, where he managed to survive and live to fight another day. Now, after World War II, or during World War II, both Mao and Chiang Kai-shek decided to work together in separate areas. They didn't fight side by side, really, but China was being attacked by Japan, and Japan was being seen by both of them as the greater evil, mostly because the Japanese were killing hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Chinese citizens during World War II, civilian and soldier alike. After World War II, Mao used guerrilla fighting. Guerrilla fighting is a technique that we've discussed before. And using that guerrilla fighting, he managed to beat the nationalists in 1949. What ended up happening after World War II is that mainland China, the majority of the country, became communist and known as the People's Republic of China. Chiang Kai-shek fled to Taiwan to create a new republic there. And that was thought of by the United States and several other countries as now China. And a lot of them ignored mainland China because it was communist. Now, as Mao took power, he's going to start looking to transform China into what he thought would make it a more modern state. Now, in the 1950s, what he did was he started to set up collective farms. He would take the land from the landlords, following through on his promise of land redistribution, take the land from those who had a lot, and create large state-run farms with 200 or 300 families all working the same large farm together. Mao Zedong also helped end the process of foot binding and gave women equal rights. He used the phrase, "women hold up half the sky." After he ended up helping with these social changes, he started to look to take it a step further. He nationalizes or has the Chinese government take over a lot of private industries and companies, which we would expect in a Chinese society. And he starts to set up China to become a more modern nation, a more industrial nation. And in these early stages, China had success during that initial period of reform. This is a couple of images of the foot binding that women would go through in China. This was mostly reserved for middle class or higher class women. And in China, it was thought to be attractive to have small feet. Now, what would happen was at a young age, they would break the bones here in the arch of the foot and then wrap that foot together. So rather than have a elongated foot for you to stand on, you would have this tiny little nub of a foot that was bound in tight silk fabric like this. It was very painful. It hurt to walk on. And unfortunately for these women, although Mao ended it and would kind of symbolically cut the bindings and sometimes literally cut the bindings, what they realized was the amount of damage that had been done to these women in foot binding was irreversible. The foot could not reform the way that it should have naturally in the beginning. And so a lot of these women were unable to walk unless they wrapped their feet all over again. Now, Mao wanted to build on that earlier success in what was known as the Great Leap Forward. The Great Leap Forward we could start to think of as the second 5-year plans under Stalin. He wanted to build on that initial success. Here we have a poster showing us a man and woman, one holding up iron representing the new industry in China, and the woman holding wheat, showing it as a Western crop. Mao wanted to make China more like the West in terms of its production capabilities. It didn't want to be the same as capitalist Europe, but it wanted to grow wheat like the West so it could be successful like the West. It wanted to have industry like the West so they could compete with the West. So that way Europe would not come to dominate China again. Now, he took those collective farms and wanted to build massive communes. 15,000 acres, and to put that into perspective, an acre is about the size of a football field. So 15,000 football fields being worked on by 25,000 people each. China has a lot of people in it. And so he wanted to switch from rice to wheat. And also, one of his kind of lofty idealistic ideas was that he was going to have the people of China use backyard furnaces. These backyard furnaces were little pig iron furnaces that people would have in their backyards and basically melt iron ore to come up with pig iron on their own. So after you finished a long day working in the communes, Mao thought in order to help China be successful, during your time off, you would melt iron, because who doesn't want to sit next to a couple 100-degree furnace and smelt iron ore in their spare time? The result of the 5-year plans, though, were not as successful in the Great Leap Forward as they were previously. With these giant communes, it was very easy to blend into the crowd, and individuals did not have a strong incentive to work hard. You didn't gain anything if your commune ended up producing more, and with 25,000 other people working, who's going to hold one specific person to blame? The other problem was that Chinese farmers didn't know how to grow wheat. Also, the climate is not well suited for wheat in China, as it was for rice. And so when the wheat crop failed, and Mao had made everyone grow wheat and there was no rice to fall back on to eat, about at least 20 million people starved to death. The numbers range from 20 million sometimes to 60 to 80 million people. I mean, just think of the ramifications of that. He decided to change one crop and 20 million people died. Backyard furnaces didn't work out because, not surprisingly, people did not want to spend their extra time making iron. And so Russia and China are going to split up. We're going to talk about the Cold War, and a lot of people think of China and Russia being friends because they're both communist countries. They actually weren't. Mao and Stalin, as time went on, ended up becoming sort of rivals and didn't like each other all that much. There was a lot of tension between the two countries. Now, on this next slide, you have 5 questions. You're going to pause the Edpuzzle here, and you're going to follow the link. You can use either the Google Classroom PowerPoint that I've already posted for your class. In order to get the link, you can just go to this slide, Control-click to follow the link, or you can go directly to YouTube, and it will pop up with this video, Sound Smart, China's Cultural Revolution. You could search that in YouTube, and it will pop up with this video. It's a short 2-minute clip. In that 2-minute clip, it will give you the information that you need in order to answer these 5 questions. Once you've watched it, you can resume this video and answer the 5 questions that will appear up after this. Now, lastly, you have a closure question, a free response for your opinion about whether you would rate Mao's rule as a positive or negative force on China. You need to give some sort of evidence from our lesson to help justify that answer. Remember ACE. So, answer, do you think it's positive or negative? Why? Cite something from this PowerPoint and then explain why that evidence is something that you chose and how it's such a negative or positive force for China. Have a great day, you guys. Our next lesson, we will be talking about Mao Zedong's follow-up leader. There's a couple in between, but he's the next most important one, and that is Deng Xiaoping. And he implements a lot of changes into China.